Hello, my darlings. Madame Raven here with a wonderful ghost story for you. This one is by MVoltaire, and it's called Money of the Dead. Looking back over my days as a paranormal investigator, I can confirm many things. The first is that ghosts are very, very real phenomena. The second is that people lie. They lie about everything. However, I am certainly not lying when I say that of 45 years' experience hauntings and exposing frauds, I have only ever left one investigation incomplete, and that was because I thought I would never get out of it alive. But I digress. Picture, if you will, a place just outside Hong Kong. I won't name the town, people still recognize it. On a hill in the middle of the town is an archaic plaza and a hotel whose name and dubious claim to notoriety had preceded it. Danny Craven and I had been invited at no small cost to come and look at the hotel's buildings. Guests stayed one night and then refused to stay more. The veranda guests were the most troubled. Wild rumors of noises and screams kept them awake until dawn. Strange stains appeared on their clothing, and their bed linens were always dripping wet by the time they awoke. Extreme cases had taken photographs of their streaming wet sheets and splattered shirts. The place felt wrong, and even as I walked over the threshold, I realized that potentially we had bitten off more than we could chew. Mr. Bayong gives his utmost apologies and regrets he cannot be here in person, said the maid almost demurely. However, he has given me this envelope. She passed over a crisp ivory envelope, very thin and made of a stiff and undoubtedly expensive paper, with a little curtsy, and left us in the hallway of the Seisheng Yao Hotel. The lights above us, lit by electricity, flickered like candlelight and cast shadows over the marble tiled floor. Picture, if you will, the oldest hotel you've ever seen. Add into that image the steaming heat of an Asian summer and the stifling air of a place used to hundreds of people, but which hadn't seen a single soul for over a week. There is such a thing as an absence of people, and it leaves a void in buildings bigger than their purpose. A house without a family is just a building. A hotel without guests is just a barn for ghosts. I looked up as if to find the maid there before me, but all I saw was a hallway empty of people and empty of life, save for us and a few lonesome spiders growing fat on the insects that crept indoors in the humid seasons. I'm surprised old Gia couldn't be bothered to introduce us to his problem. Craven ran a finger idly over the metal railing and examined the dust on his fingertip in the dim light. He brushed it off abruptly. I shrugged, half expecting the envelope would shed a little light on the issue. After all, we knew what the problem was. Blink, blink. Out popped the lights above our head, and we were suddenly plunged into darkness in the middle of the day, in a hotel which had seen better decades. Craven flinched, and then raised his hand over his ears. Get ready, Dee. I think she's going to... He never finished a sentence, or if he did, it was drowned out by the sudden, guttural howl that pushed past us like a roaring wind. It was a woman's scream, long, loud, and full of intense pain. One moment it would sound as though it came from far off down the maze of corridors that lined the Seisheng Yao, and the next, she was at your ear, crooning and babbling in Mandarin Chinese. Not something I speak, but Craven did. When I asked him about what she was saying, he blanched and told me that it was pretty much the same thing over and over again. That bastard took me into the linen cupboard and broke me over and over again. And then he slit my throat. Why won't someone catch that bastard, man? It wasn't as if we hadn't tried. We'd been all over the century-old plan of the place, checking for every room that had been a linen cupboard, or every linen closet that was now a room. The quietness of the hallways was worse than the screams. You strained your ears to hear past the tiniest movements in the rooms beyond you. Sometimes there was footsteps. Perhaps they were the staff. I didn't think so. There were sometimes peals of laughter that flowed from rooms that we knew categorically were locked. I tried the door of one room. The giggles intensified as I pushed against the cold brown wood and brass of the door. There was a louder laugh, more intense, and I felt something shove me aside. The room door opened very slowly, as though the people behind it were simply expecting room service. A lamp, a bed made very tightly with damp sheets, a shabby carpet, nothing more. I stepped closer to the doorway, and with a resounding smack, the door slammed shut in my face. I didn't stay to listen to the laughter again. The problem was, we had already exorcised every damn linen cupboard in the building, all 18 of them. And every time we had the same result: peace and quiet, followed by a month of no complaints, and then a summoning email from Jay Bayong explaining that we had done a half-assed job. This time the email had come with an extra caveat that if we didn't finish the job, he would be suing us for false representation of our services. I didn't really worry about that, but the more tangible threat that we had placed delicately in front of us was the appearance of Wangxing Li, a man whose name is not generally taken lightly in the areas where we operated. It had been a Thursday morning when we received the email, and Craven opened the door on Thursday night to a man who was lounging against the corridor walls like a lizard. He picked his teeth clean with a dirty toothpick, and when asked in no polite terms what he wanted, he spat on the floor before delivering his message. Old Gia wanted things fixed at the hotel before opening season of the Double Nines Festival, and that was only a month away. But no maids were capable of staying in that place while the noise, yes, he really did use that term, was still there. Make sure you frickers get the bitch quiet down, or next time it'll be your head screaming in the wind. To illustrate the point, he took his toothpick and slammed it into the soft meat of Craven's hand, just past the web of the pinky finger. Once I'd been able to remove the filthy wood from his hand, I cleaned Craven's wound while he let loose a torrent of every expletive he had ever learned in Cantonese. Wangxing Li's appearance, though, made me wonder if we shouldn't just hightail it out of the job. Give back the bonus and go. Never, Craven croaked and lit a cigarette. Never will I let that son of a so high talk me down from a job. Plus we have that woman's honor to restore. For all that he can swear and bluster, Danny Craven is one of the more loyal men I've known in this business. After all, paranormal investigators are usually no bullshit policemen trying to expose cheaters and scumbags making a fast buck, or practical jokers frightening people for their own stupid pranks. But Jay Bayong was none of these. I had only ever seen him at a distance, in a crowded casino over a game of mahjong, which he was frenetic, and surrounded by wealthy men trying to impress this Korean with a fat, rolling waddle and sallow face. Old Gia, as his friends knew him, was a relentless man, bent on making as much money as he could out of everything in his life. There were rumors that his first wife hadn't given him a son, that he had sent her to one of his cat houses to make her life more profitable to him as a barren prostitute. But, as I say, these were all rumors. You couldn't get near the man usually. A certain amount of truth might have been mixed with the lies, but it was all an aura of confused rumor. And of course, a certain fearful respect. "Dee, what does the envelope say?" I pulled my head out of my arms and retrieved it from the inside pocket, walking a little unsteadily to where there was the most light. The envelope crackled a little in my hands. I read the note, but it wasn't Gia's handwriting. "Up to the 10th floor, I managed, my voice croaking a little. "We've been asked to come." Craven led the way, our sore feet trusting more to the stairs than the ancient and unsteady elevator's electrics. If the ghost could dim lights and cause fluctuations in electrical current, I wasn't going to be stuck in an elevator car whilst she did so. One guest already had, and thanked his rescuers an hour later from inside the car. However, as they helped him over the threshold of the elevator, he dropped dead from some kind of cardiac shock, falling flat onto the polished marble like a sack of meat. We arrived on the 10th floor, slightly winded from the palatial staircases. Craven raised his hand to knock, but before he could even reach the cold ebony of the doors, they swung wide open. Not a creak, not a sound. In fact, the only sound was that of a shamisen gently being played, while a koto sounded out a few calming notes. Folk songs. Odd. "Come in." The voice spoke in English, and it was a calm tone, not the fast rolling of Mandarin. At the end of an immense black hallway that sparkled with the light from every shiny surface of polished marble, Gia Baiyong sat in a winged armchair that faced away from the doors, towards a mantelpiece. He looked remarkably calm, for a man who likes his flunkies to send out flunkies to deliver his more bloody, persuasive messages. The shamisen music flowed to a gentle stop, and with one hand, he gestured to us. "Sit." I have never been overwhelmed before by a sense of the supernatural. I reminded myself that this was just a hotel with a minor problem that simply wouldn't go away. It wasn't like Borley Rectory or the De La Pass, and this was the heart of a fucking hotel with a spook haunting its linen cupboard, for the love of God. No, I've never been overwhelmed before, but there was only one word for the sensation that crawled suddenly on my skin like molten wax, and that was fear. Old Gia wasn't feeling it, but Craven, standing beside me, suddenly reached down, and I felt his cool hand fold itself neatly around mine. His fingers pressed against mine, not in passion, but for a sudden, desperate need for reassurance. I could feel the pulse in his fingertips, pounding his fear out in biologic Morse. My own heart sped up a little in sympathy. The wind from the corridor behind us began to pick up, softly at first, and then the breeze became noticeable. Gia Baiyong looked mildly annoyed, and then noticed the breeze on his face, softly flapping around the folds of his linen suit. "I've been told you cannot find my ghost, yet she seems to be making a lot of trouble for everyone, despite the fact she cannot be found by 2 trained ghost hunters, people who have been offered a lot of money to make this problem go away from me." Gia's voice sounded preternaturally pissed off. His linen suit rippled around him. He brushed down the edges of his jacket. "At least when I lay my bets, Mr. Craven, I do not pretend I have the money. I make sure I can pay. You, on the other hand." Craven flinched, pulling me down beside him as Gia Baiyong whipped out a silenced pistol. It looked for a moment like a flash of gray and silver in the air around him. bright against the dark marble, the wind that had been just a mere breeze before starting to blow into a gale, there in the room. I held my breath against it, barely able to fight against it. We crouched there behind what looked like a gigantic ceramic urn, bright and very expensive, and certainly to the highest of Gia's taste, but was, on closer inspection, a solid piece of sculpture. I knew this only because moments later it chose to explode around us. Fuck! We scuttled to one side. The wind picked up debris and ceramic dust in equal measures, and spinning it into a deadly cloud of projective sharps. The look on Craven's face told me that we actually had found out where Gia's ghost lived. However, Gia hadn't suspected it for one moment. We had spent all of our time exercising the hotel, when the real haunting had been with Gia himself. The wind intensified into a whirling of paper, cloth, and ceramic dust in the very middle of the room. Gia looked astonished as a soft, wan light began to pulse from the very heart of the maelstrom. It looked for all the world as though a figure was forming there from the fractured parts of the fabric of the room. It was growing clearer by the moment, and it fed on the lights from around it, until the room was almost dark, with the cold, clear absence of light. Gia, my Gia. It was the same voice. It was undoubtedly her. And perhaps this time we would see a manifestation. I didn't know exactly how. My guess was that the form she chose might be the one she remembered best from when she was alive. But I was not prepared for what stepped out of that blinding tornado of grit and trash. From the darkest part of the room, two women walked, hand in hand. The light from the core of the storm ceased and began to glitter around them like stars in a faint mist. Craven was very, very silent and put his arms around me protectively. The air seemed colder. Gia, in the center of the room, dropped his pistol and stared. He didn't make a noise, but it seemed as though he could have talked to these two apparitions for years. Worlds of recognition shone in his cold and dark eyes. Gia, the older woman said. She was dressed in a very formal gown, topped by a long coat of the kind that was popular before the war. Do you remember me? He blinked. In the cold and placid blue light that now filled the room, he finally found that he could speak. Mama? The ghost of Gia Baiyong's mother gracefully nodded to him, but her face was cold and not at all serene. Look at this place. A son should have more respect for the parents who raised him. You inherited this hotel, Gia. Your father raised a son who is no more fit to look after it than a foreigner. She said this with a mild glance aside that went straight through both of us. Is that who I think it is? Craven whispered into my ear. Yes, it's his mother. She looks about as pissed as a ghost can get without throwing things. He never mentioned the fact his mother had died without proper funeral rites, though. I frowned. What do you mean? If she had been buried with full ceremony, the lords of the dead wouldn't let her back to become a ghost. Unless she had some unfinished business. I think that's what this may be about. The woman beside her turned her head away. A far younger face. She was a good few inches shorter and almost skeletally slender, with the clothes of a skivvy. Her eyes only looked at the ground. This is Ming Ming. I think you remember her, but you may not remember that she had a baby. Her sleeve was thrust aside, and the small body of an infant lay there, quiet and still and very silent. I think you remember Ming Ming because she was going to have the baby. And then you did something to her to make her be quiet and to go away. You did not want to pay her. You did not want her alive. Gia just looked, open mouth. He looked, and slowly he started to tremble. The ghost of Gia's mother turned to us directly. Craven pulled me up gently by the hand, and without thinking I bowed. Short, deep, respectful. When I dared to look back up again at her, she had moved, walking across the floor of the room, but a few feet above it. Keeping her gaze steadily upon me, she addressed me directly. "My son has asked you to do something to clear up his own messes, but there is only one thing you can do for Ming Ming and her child. Please knock down the wall at the back of the cleaning room on the 5th. There you will find the linen cupboard where my grandson rests, and you will find Ming Ming in a chair just behind the wall. My son is incapable of clearing up his own messes, and when he killed my grandson without even seeing his face, the Lords of Death allowed me to return here and make sure that he will be responsible for what he has done." I nodded. "We will." "Good. My son will not be able to pay you properly, so here is payment." I felt a cold, hard block of something pass into my hands. "But you will do this for us, I think. The Lords of Death do not usually allow us to make payment, but it is nearly the double nines. We need to make sure everything is balanced out for the rest of the year, as Gia will not be celebrating it for us this year. I think it will allow us something of an offering." I bowed again. There was nothing else to say. Gia was crumpled on the floor, sobbing in a pile of dust and ash, whilst the form of Ming Ming looked on tenderly at her child, the one who had died before he was given a name. Occasionally there was a tiny gurgle from him, but the scene was about as peaceful as a gathering of storm clouds. The air crackled, and the winds began again, around them on the floor, and I grabbed at Craven's sleeve. "Go now, both of you. We have business to finish." The specter of Gia's mother shouted to be heard over the howl of the onrushing air. We were almost blown back down the passage, out of the room and along the hallway. Lights flickered above our heads as we passed, so it wasn't until we reached the grand staircase that I was able to look at what those phantoms had passed on to me. It was a small, compact brick of gold. It didn't glitter or shine. There was a single stamp in the very middle, just a few characters. Craven looked at it and then blanched. "Money for the dead. D. Let's get a mallet and end this." I went with him down to the 5th floor. We found the laundry cupboard, behind the wall, just as she said we would. Ming Ming's mummified corpse was resting in a chair that was stained with very old dried blood, as if she had hemorrhaged to death after giving birth. She had made no effort to try and stop it, but instead had made up a tiny bed for the premature infant she had given birth to, in the very linen cupboard where she was attacked. I looked at her throat, and there was a shriveled, incised knife mark, as though she had fought off an attacker. Never had a chance, did she? I nodded grimly. In the final confusion of her death, Ming Ming had focused on only two things: her son and the shock of her attack. I suspected Wang Xingli had been either her attacker or the man who built the wall at the back of the cleaning cupboard, or perhaps both. However, I did know one thing. Old Gia would never be talking about it. I can recall hearing distant screams from the 10th floor penthouse. Both Craven and I looked at one another and kept working. They stopped, eventually. I gently took the tiny mummified corpse of her child and laid it in her arms. There really isn't much left to tell. We both left the Saixing-go that day and never looked back. I visited a local temple and spoke very quietly and in private to a priest, who, for a nice donation, agreed to bury the gold bar deep inside the nearest cemetery. The money itself would pay for a few rites for the dead, and perhaps a little ceremony where a dead child could be given a name, and the commemoration in the halls of the dead. But I often wonder what might have happened if we tried to exorcise the ghosts of the Seishing Go that night. If we accepted Zhai Beiyong's money, if we had tried to take the gold bar as payment. There are many things left unknown, and that's the way I prefer them to stay. After all, I know no one who has managed to spend the money of the dead in the land of the living.